Alright, so welcome back from break. The last thing that we were on then was the parts of the digestive system, or the compartments. Just to kind of introduce those to you. So at one end would be the mouth, and that's the opening to the digestive system. That would be followed by another cavity here called the buccal cavity. We talked about the buccal cavity when we talked about amphibians, right? That positive pressure breathing. Then from the buccal cavity, we have a pharynx. The pharynx is a muscular portion whose job it is to conduct material to the next compartment. That would be the esophagus. And the esophagus is a tube from the pharynx to the next compartment, whose job it is to kind of conduct material down to that compartment. As with a lot of these tubes and compartments of the digestive system, movement of material is accomplished through this activity called peristalsis, where peristalsis are these rhythmic contractions that are used to conduct material in a particular direction. So if I had a bunch of circular muscle around this tube, I would contract here first, then here, then here, then here, then here, and that would have the effect of pushing something along ahead of these contractions. That's referred to as peristalsis. Okay? In some animals, for example this bird, the esophagus pushes material to what's called a crop. A crop is like a holding bin. It's like a big bag within the organism that just holds material. So we consider this to be more storage than anything. And then the crop can dole out small amounts of material to what's called the gizzard. And the gizzard's job is a heck of a lot of mechanical digestion. In some animals like us, the crop and the gizzard together, the storage and digestion is accomplished in the same organ, and we would refer to that organ as a stomach. Okay. Then from the stomach, we would move to tubes called intestines, where absorption of materials typically takes place, and then that intestine would move next to a compartment in birds called a cloaca, also in reptiles too, and this cloaca receives material both from the digestive system and the urogenital system, and together moves them together for elimination. In mammals, the urogenital system and the digestive system are separate. So for us, instead of a cloaca, we would have this compartment called the rectum that can store material up and then eliminate it all at once out through the opening, which would be called the anus. Okay? So here's a nice little generalization of digestive tract, right? There's the mouth to the buccal cavity, the esophagus, either the stomach or the crop and gizzard in birds, to the intestines, and then either to a cloaca or a rectum that would then move material out through the opening called the anus. Okay? All right. All right, let's do mammals in more detail. After all, we're mammals, so there should be a little more interest in what mammals are doing than some obscure bird, amphibian, or reptile. So let's walk through this process of digestion, specifically the alimentary canal in mammals. So food is brought in through the mouth, and we bring it into what we could call a buccal cavity, but is more specifically called an oral cavity in mammals. And associated with this oral cavity are a bunch of glands. These glands produce a material called saliva. This saliva is very important because it contains a glycoprotein that has the function of lubricating this material that we brought into our mouths. This glycoprotein that functions as a lubricant is called mucin. And basically what mucin does is it protects us, or the inside of our oral cavity, from whatever it is that we've eaten. So think about, I eat a bunch of potato chips, I break those potato chips into little pieces, and those little pieces have all these sharp edges, and there's a lot of soft tissue inside your oral cavity, but the saliva is coating all of this stuff, specifically this mucin. It's making it so that when the potato chip bangs against the inside of your cheek, it slides off of it instead of digging into it. Okay? You have some main salivary glands you probably will learn about in human gross anatomy, like the parotid glands, etc. There are also little tiny salivary glands all in the inside of your cheeks that also produce this saliva. Okay? In addition to containing mucin, the saliva also contains some other important molecules. My whiteboard's getting a little less white. In addition to the mucin, the saliva contains buffers. These would be chemical buffers. So think back to MCB, think about that pH scale, and somebody probably made the point to you that most of the stuff that we consider to be biological molecules, that is the carbohydrates, the nucleic acids, the proteins, fatty acids, etc., that these molecules tend to have a pH lower than 7. So they're acidic. And bringing in acidic food into us, acid has the effect of kind of etching away at tissues. So these buffers are chemical buffers to pull the pH back up to around 7 to try to minimize that damage that the acids are doing to the oral cavity and the first part of the digestive system. Okay? Also, in addition to buffers, some enzymes, including salivary amylase. Salivary amylase works on amylose, amylopectin, and glycogen. All of these carbohydrates have those alpha-1,4 glycosidic linkages, and salivary amylase can cleave those, but it acts in a weird way because instead of taking a long sequence of alpha glucose molecules and doing hydrolysis to remove the last one, the salivary amylase tends to chop things up into 2 glucose pieces. So it converts amylopectin, amylose, and glycogen into a bunch of maltose, where maltose is a disaccharide composed of alpha glucose molecules. Okay? All right, in addition to the salivary amylase, we also have enzymes in the saliva that are antimicrobial. And that should make a lot of sense. Any food we take in is going to have microbes on it. So the idea would be to try to remove any of the nasty bacteria through the use of these enzymes. These enzymes would target bacterial cell walls for the most part. Okay? All right. Now, Also, inside that oral cavity, in addition to the salivary glands, we also have teeth. Okay. Teeth participate mainly in mechanical digestion. Right, trying to tear food up into smaller and smaller pieces. The teeth are really, among the animal kingdom, are unique to the vertebrates. You're not going to find an earthworm with teeth. Right? They're unique to the vertebrates. They're usually capped with a material called enamel. I'm sure your dentist talks about it. Your toothpaste probably has some comments about enamel. But enamel is this coating around the teeth. Enamel is the hardest substance in the human body. It's a very, very durable molecule. Okay, and then lastly, we know that the teeth are derived from the neural crest cells from what we talked about early on with embryonic development. Okay? All right. Now, in addition to mechanical digestion, as I said, mainly mechanical digestion, the other thing teeth are for is grabbing and holding prey. You could imagine a cat is going after a bird. The cat uses its teeth to hold the bird in place until it can kill it. And then the teeth would be used for this kind of mechanical digestion of the bird once it's dead. Okay? All right, the teeth are increasing surface area of the food, right? I showed you this before. I break this into smaller pieces. I increase the overall amount of surface area on which the saliva can operate and subsequent enzymes within the digestive system. Right, so I'm working to break this up into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces. In some vertebrates, they only have one tooth type. All the teeth look the same. These vertebrates are called the homodonts. This is everybody except the mammals. And then the mammals have different types of teeth, so they're referred to collectively as the heterodonts, because we make different types of teeth. All right, teeth types. 4 possible types of teeth. Hopefully this marker holds out. All right, 4 different types of teeth. The first one's called an incisor. Right, so these are the teeth at the front. You can see the incisors labeled up there on that carnivore too. We have the 2 incisors at the top and the 2 incisors at the bottom. These tend to be sharp, thin, chisel-like teeth, and what they're good for is cutting, right? Slicing things into successive kind of layers as you like chisel your way through food. Okay, number 2, the canines. Canines are pointed and sharp, right? And they're used for gripping. So if you were a lion trying to hold on to a prey, you would use those canines to hold the prey in place. Same thing with a cat. And in addition to gripping, they're also used for tearing. So you could tear the food into smaller and smaller pieces by using those canines. Premolars. There are premolars here in that dog. Premolars are a flat biting surface, good for tearing, and also really good for crushing, right? Grab something in those and kind of bring those 2 premolars together and crush something. Okay? Might not think much about crushing with us, although we might use the premolars as well as the molars for crushing something like ice We don't tend to do a lot of that kind of crushing, but if I were a deer eating acorns, I'd crush those with those premolars, as well as the last group of teeth here, further back, called the molars. And the molars are also a flat surface, good for crushing, and also really good for grinding food down into smaller and smaller pieces. Okay? All right. No matter what type of tooth we're talking about here, they tend to be put together fairly similarly. The overall kind of tooth shape is a structure that sticks out of the gums. So let's put some gums in here. See if I can draw a nice little tooth. Okay, so that's one type of tooth morphology in mammals. The other kind here and I need to bring up these. I'm trying to draw from notes and I don't have my glasses on. That's always interesting. Can't really tell what I'm looking at anymore. All right. All right, two types of teeth. This type is referred to as a cuspid. It has make this a little flatter. It has one cusp